In 2010, a well-known UK music magazine rejected a request to review Sequetron. One staff member said it had, quotes, been around for rather too long, even though they still review programmes which are older than Sequetron, and another said he'd never heard of it but would pass it on. Nothing transpired, so it obviously fell by the wayside as being just another sequencer, which seems to be a common misconception and misses out on its real purpose and user interface, which, as far as I know, was unique back then and remains so to this day. So I thought I'd mark its 40th birthday with a recap of this interface and have another go at clearing up the misconceptions. Now, firstly, Sequetron was never meant to be a conventional sequencer or DAW, even though it has similar features. It's designed to be a MIDI processor and is inserted between a music keyboard and one or more sound generators. Its primary goal is to modify the behaviour of your music keyboard, effectively transforming it into a more advanced instrument to help create musical ideas, the front end of the music making process, if you like, for inspiring and improvising, or just noodling around with music. The keyboard and sound generator can be separate devices, like these, or they can both be contained in the same device. The Sequetron solves a problem with conventional programs, which, in my view, can be a distraction, as their focal point is the computer. The music keyboard is secondary. For example, say you come up with an epic riff and want to record it. But by the time you've moved from the music keyboard over to the computer mouse or QWERTY keyboard, navigated menus and prompts, set the number of bars, armed the track, pressed record, and moved back to the music keyboard, you've forgotten what you were trying to record in the first place. In contrast, Sequetron's focal point is the music keyboard, and the computer is secondary, just for configuration and status. And this keeps your hands, eyes and mindset away from the computer, so less distractions and more spontaneity, perfect for improvising or jamming or composing or just having fun. The back-end processes, such as editing or building complete songs where spontaneity is not so critical, are better handled by conventional programs, so these features are absent by design. But you can save your ideas in standard MIDI file format and import them into your favourite DAW as needed. Now, before describing the interface, what is it actually controlling? Well, there's a set of MIDI tracks called sequences on which you can record and playback in a variety of ways, and an additional track called Live, which represents your input device, the music keyboard. The music keys can operate on any combination of these. Here's an example of Sequetron's way of arming a track, recording and playing it back. Note that my hands never leave the music keyboard. I've exaggerated the method to show what's happening, but there are many other videos showing how quick the process can be. I can still play live to try out further ideas. And as you can see, some of the music keys act as controls, and this in itself is not very innovative. Some other programs allow keys to be mapped as controls, but with conventional static mapping, the more keys you reserve, the fewer keys are left for playing. The unique feature with Sequetron is that the mapping is dynamic. The maps are structured into modes which change automatically depending on the context. This may sound complicated, but is more intuitive than you think, and is a lot easier to show than describe. It allows a huge range of controls, but only reserves a single key. The mapping for the current mode is always shown on screen for reference, but if you write or print some labels above the keys as a memory jogger, you rarely have to look at the screen, so you can keep your eyes on the music keyboard as well as your hands. So how does it work? Well, the normal state of the music keyboard is called live mode, where all keys play as normal, with the exception of a single note which is reserved or mapped to a function called command. You can use any of the 128 possible MIDI notes for this, so if you do not want to reserve a physical key, you can use a note outside the keyboard's range, assuming you have a way of triggering it. A Sequetron can handle multiple input ports, so you could use a pad or a foot switch for this, or even another keyboard. Now, I normally use a physical key for convenience, typically the leftmost key, as I'm right-handed, but you can map it anywhere. Now, when this key is pressed or triggered, the mapping instantly flips to command mode, where the music keys now act as commands, such as record, play, tempo, and so on. There are also functions to select or deselect any combination of the sequences and the live track. And there's also an escape function which returns to live mode if you want to abort the command. Now, if you're thinking that this is no better than static mapping, as all these keys are now unplayable, this mode is only temporary and typically lasts a split second. Once you've pressed the required command, it operates on the selected items and returns to live mode automatically. You can pre-configure certain commands to take a default action if nothing was selected. For example, the play command could play all sequences if nothing was selected, whereas for safety, the record command could be ignored if nothing was selected. Here's an example with play. Start from live mode, everything plays. You do command, play. All sequences play as a loop, and we're now back to live mode. You're only away from live mode for a fraction of a second. Same with stop. Command, stop. All sequences stop when they reach the end of their respective cycles. Now if I press Command, Sequence 1, play, it only plays Sequence 1. The command itself determines the next mode. So for simple commands, like we've just seen, play and stop, the keys return immediately to live mode. Other simple commands include increment and decrement functions, such as program or patch number up or down, and tempo up or down. Okay, what about more complex commands, say absolute tempo, where we need a beats per minute value, or BPM? Well, these automatically flip to another mode where the music keys are mapped to values suitable for that command. In this case, absolute tempo needs 3 digits for the BPM, so it flips to digit mode, where the keys are mapped to the digits 0 to 9. We can just press the 3 numbers required and the keys return to live mode immediately. I'll just set a sequence playing. I'm going to do tempo 180. still live. Or tempo 120, still live. And stop. The digits can be mapped to any keys in any order. Here's the pitch command. This needs a single semitone shift value, so the mode flips to pitch shift mode, where the keys are mapped to semitone shifts up or down. And as soon as the value key is pressed, the keys return to live mode. Again, let's start a sequence. Pitch, up 5. Pitch, down 5. The shift values can be chosen from a much larger set and can be mapped anywhere in any order. Every command uses the same consistent logic to keep it as easy and intuitive as possible, all the while minimizing the impact on playability. I describe this logic or syntax of entering commands as a command sequence, as it's basically a small sequence of MIDI notes, but one enthusiast dubbed it with a more glamorous title, Sequetronics. There are many other commands available, but just treat Sequetron as a toolkit and choose whichever ones you want, and map them onto whichever keys you want. You can make your instrument as simple or as complex as you like. The mappings can be saved as separate configurations, so you could create different variants for different purposes, say for small and large keyboards, or one specializing in scales and chord progressions. If your keyboard is big enough, there's nothing to stop you mapping all possible commands, and you still have full playability in live mode. Okay, that's an overview of how it works. How do you connect Sequetron into your setup? Well, it needs access to MIDI input and output ports, and these are then inserted in between any MIDI source, like a music keyboard or pads, and one or more sound generators. And depending on your computer's interface, you can use physical MIDI cables, or MIDI over USB, or even virtual MIDI if your sound generators are running on the same computer, such as with a soft synth. If the computer has nothing else running on it, it can be treated as a black box and tucked away in the background. It runs under MS Windows, so Mac and Linux users can run it under Boot Camp and Wine, but if this is not practical, the requirements are so minimal, anything from Windows XP onwards will do. It's even worth dedicating an old PC to Sequetron, like this notebook, which can be picked up for a song, along with a simple MIDI to USB adapter. This whole setup can be plugged into any MIDI keyboard, magically enhancing its capabilities as an instrument, while the computer itself just sits in the background. If the keyboard and sound generator are separate, just connect the keyboard's MIDI output to Sequetron's input, and Sequetron's output to the sound generator's input. If they are both part of the same device, connect the device's MIDI output to Sequetron's input, and Sequetron's output to the device's input. In these cases, though, you also need to disable the device's internal link so its keyboard no longer drives the sound generator directly. There will usually be a configuration setting in the device called local control, and this microKORG gets a menu option, so set it to off. But with this device, a Yamaha electric piano, which does not have a menu, you can still configure it using a combination of button presses as shown in its user manual. In this case, press and hold these two buttons, then press and release music key C6. Once the internal link is disabled, the keys will not make a sound until Sequetron is connected. The individual commands are all demoed in other videos, so I won't go into details here, but some unusual ones to aid inspiration, which you may not find elsewhere, include alternating play and mute cycles, alternating pitch shift cycles, multi-channel to fatten up your sounds, make a drawbar organ. And also increment for recording to consecutive tracks on the fly. Sequetron also contains a couple of extra utilities. There's a general purpose MIDI monitor for input and output, and a sample aid utility for checking the accuracy of samples on sample-based instruments like romplers, and it also facilitates automatic capture of samples. The documentation and video links are on the Philisound website. The links are in the description, and there's a free lightweight version to give you a taster, but obviously the full version is much more powerful and flexible. There's an email address on the website, so just shout if you have any questions. And finally, a quick call out to any microcontroller enthusiasts out there. The key map labels shown on screen can also be sent to a MIDI port using system exclusive messages, so any third-party device can use them. The original concept in the 1980s was to display these labels above each key on the music keyboard, but the cost was prohibitive back then. Now it would be feasible with, say, a strip of cheap OLED displays like these, placed above each key or group of keys. So if you're interested in designing a device to decode the MIDI and display the labels like this, please get in touch. It would be nice to finally see Sequetron as envisaged 40 years ago. Okay, that's it. Thanks to all supporters over the past 40 years, and please share this to any person or music magazine you think may be interested. Thanks for watching.